Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's live talk, the latest in a series of expert dialogues brought to you by Bayer. Our topic today is forests and how we can preserve and grow them. My name is Melinda Crane, and it's a great pleasure to accompany you as moderator. In these LinkedIn live talks, we've often talked about the nexus between climate change, biodiversity, and health. Forests are one of the critical hinges between the three. As the world's biggest CO2 absorber, they amount to Earth's lungs, yet they're under pressure as never before. Massive swathes of trees are being cut down every year. Since 2016, an average of 28 million hectares per year, that's one football field of forest lost every single second around the clock. Last July, a team of scientists reported that the Amazon is emitting more carbon dioxide than it can absorb. The bottom line, destruction and degradation of forests now account for 12% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. So in this live talk, we want to take a deep dive on the reasons for and the solutions to this very grave disruptive trend. And we do so with two guests whose wealth of experience in this field make them ideally suited to help us better understand the complex challenges, but also the opportunities of getting to net zero deforestation by 2030. Eron Bloomgarden is founder and executive director of Emergent Forest Finance Accelerator, a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to accelerating the speed and scale of forest conservation. Emergent is also the administrative coordinator of the LEAF Coalition, of which Bayer is a founding member. A pioneer in the development of carbon markets, Eron has advised governments, multilateral institutions, and others on how to develop emissions reduction projects that truly make a difference. Great to have you with us, joining us from New York. Welcome, Eron. And I'm so pleased. Great to see you. I'm so pleased to welcome Matthias Berninger. He's a regular at these live talks. Since 2019, he served as Senior Vice President for Public Affairs and Sustainability at Bayer. He's the architect of Bayer's Global Sustainability Initiative, focusing on conservation of biodiversity and driving the corporate ambition of helping more people thrive within the planetary boundaries. He joins us from Washington. Great to see you again. Welcome, Matthias.
Good to see you, Melinda.
Before we start the discussion, just a very quick word, dear audience, on how you can participate in our discussion. Please use the comment function for this purpose, and I will bring in your questions a little bit later on. And now let's start out with a quick glimpse at your personal links to our topic. And I'll put my first question, if I may, to Eron. Back in 1999, you co-founded the New York City chapter of the Surfrider Foundation, a grassroots nonprofit organization that works to protect and preserve the world's oceans, waves, and beaches. So what inspired that early spirit of activism, and what prompted you to switch from water to trees?
Thanks so much for the question, Melinda. It's first of all, just to say it's really great to be here. I'm delighted to participate, and Matthias, it's great to be here also with you. So on the question, as a surfer, when you are in the water, there really is this sort of visceral feeling that you're literally submerged and surrounded in the environment, and many surfers know not to go in the water after a big downpour because of all the pollution runoff and the risk of potentially getting sick. So it really is there that I would say my environmental consciousness was awakened. And then in terms of your question around switching from water to forest, I think that really came through travel, especially in the tropics. And it was probably the first time that I stepped into a primary forest. There aren't really many primary forests left, meaning when I say primary forest, I mean original forests that haven't been chopped down and then regrown at some point. But there's something very primal about stepping into a primary forest and seeing it just feels different, especially in the tropics, but frankly anywhere. There's something deeply soulful about that experience, and really I'd recommend that to everyone listening to this. If you have an opportunity, go find a primary forest and get in there and feel what that feels like. And so that's really where kind of the passion for forests really started. But beyond that, from a practical perspective, in my early days in the carbon markets, I spent a lot of time traveling around the developing world, developing just about every type of greenhouse gas emission reduction project that was available, from renewable energy to methane destruction on landfills or agriculture, energy efficiency. And in that time, I really came to the realization, while all those interventions, right, are really important and a lot of good can come from them, there really is no parallel from an emission reduction or climate mitigation solution that can compare to protecting forests, precisely because of the additional benefits, sometimes called co-benefits, that forests provide. So when we protect the forest, we protect the plants and animal biodiversity. We support indigenous and local communities that may live in and depend on the forest. We provide the spirit, people with a spiritual connection to that place that so many of these places hold. Local environmental quality. There's so many benefits, co-benefits that come with forests, and so that's really, shifting. I still love the water. I still love oceans. We've got huge environmental issues with the oceans, but really thinking about forests, the co-benefits they provide, and the massive scale they hold in helping us really address this climate challenge.
And I want to come back to that and let you dig deeper in just a moment. But let me go over to Matthias. Back in your days in German politics, you served as parliamentary state secretary at the German Federal Ministry of Food, Agriculture, and Consumer Protection. And there you were responsible for forestry. From previous conversations, I know that your passion for today's topic has, and please don't bother to excuse this pun because it's intended, deep roots. So how come?
Well, it starts with my family. So when I look at pictures of both of my grandfathers, they were farmers. And of course, forests played a huge role in the 40s, 50s, and 60s as part of the farming. So in the winter, basically, they moved from being farmers to being foresters. So where I come from in Germany, there's still a lot of forest. During my time in the political arena, there was a huge controversy around whether we should protect one of those forests and turn it into a national park. And that conversion today is a source of pride for everybody in my home region. And so the topic just was with me for a very, very long time. And it's one of the things I really enjoy, kind of having a nice walk in the forests in my home region. And I remember one very fondly last summer when the pandemic was over with my father. And it's just a special place It doesn't need to be the tropics. It could be forests around where you live. But the important part is forests suffer from climate change, from climate changing in ways that is really, really scary. And the forest fires we've seen in Canada, in Siberia, we've seen at the west coast of the United States, to a point that we could see the smoke in Washington, D.C., are just some of those examples that demonstrate how forests and climates are interlinked.
Absolutely. And I would like to talk a little bit more about that nexus between climate protection and biodiversity that in fact, I mentioned earlier, saying that forests in a way are a hinge in that connection. Eron, in your 2018 TED Talk, you encouraged your audience to think of forests as a quote unquote powerful and safe technology that just might save our planet. Can you say a few more words about that and about how forests do that exactly? And also whether you would make that same claim today in the face of rapidly accelerating degradation. Can forests really hope to still play, or can we still hope that they can play that role?
Yeah, well, thanks, Melinda. And you said earlier that forests, the destruction and degradation of forests are a huge contributor to climate change. 10 to 15% of greenhouse gas emissions are coming from forests. People learn early in their life that trees suck in, breathe in CO2 and breathe out oxygen. We all learn that when we're kids. And so I think the idea that trees are the lungs of the planet sort of makes intuitive sense to people. And so that's where we get this concept of planting trees can be so important. But I think what people miss also is that they're also a huge source of greenhouse gas emissions through the destruction of forests. Sometimes the sort of mental image I have is imagine a few coal-fired power plants burning in the Amazon or in these forested regions. So we need to stop that. So forests they suck in CO2 and they hold that carbon in their branches, in the soil, in their roots, in their trunks. So when we destroy the forest, they release this, the CO2 back into the atmosphere, or greenhouse gases back into the atmosphere. So we need to stop that. And then we need to restore forests. And so for whatever reason, the economy is sort of programmed, and we look for technological solutions to so many problems. And sometimes the narrative around solving climate change really goes into these corners of, we need a technological fix. We need some new technology that's going to suck. I love this, right? Direct air capture. It's going to suck CO2 out of the atmosphere, and it's going to inject it into the ground. We probably do need that. I mean, we need an all tools approach to climate change. We're really at that level of urgency. But trees have been around for a long time. That's essentially what they do. And so we need to think about them as technology, right? It's an ancient technology, but we need to think about that as a technology, just as we would something that's developed in a lab. Someone once said, if a tree was invented in a lab and financed by Wall Street, we would never cut one down, right? So.
Very nice. Thank you very much for that, Matthias. The fact is, a powerful technology, yet one that is shrinking, and deforestation is, in fact, intimately linked to agricultural systems and the demand for food and agricultural land to nourish a growing global population. So what does that mean for Bayer, which of course is a global leader in agricultural products? Is there a conflict there?
There's a huge conflict when you look at livestock production around the world, when you look at agriculture expansion in general, between forest protection, also protection of other very important ecosystems like peatlands on the one side, and the growing demand for food, fiber, and fuel on the other side. I mean, this year we will welcome number 8 billion to humanity. So never have been more people on this planet. And that is a conflict that we have to acknowledge, but we also have to solve that problem. And I believe it can only happen if, on the one hand, we are firm on protecting the forests, and on the other hand, we intensify the agricultural production on the remaining land. Roughly half of the world today is in agricultural use. That needs to be enough. Arguably, we need to produce what we need on less land than half of the land mass of the Earth. And that is important for agriculture as well. Eron was passionate about water before he entered the forest space. Now, he can still be passionate about water because rainforest is called rainforest for a reason. It produces the necessary rain that farmers around the world, especially in the regions linked to the rainforests, need to grow their food. Without water, there won't be any farming anyway. So we have to find a way to protect the existing forests. And I was extremely happy to see that COP26 started with a very broad coalition agreeing to stop deforestation by 2030. We hope that we can accelerate that journey and stop deforestation much earlier than that, because one thing is often not understood. An existing forest, especially a tropical forest, can absorb much more carbon than a forest you would grow from the scratch. So all the afforestation efforts, as important as they are, cannot deliver the same ecosystem benefits the existing natural forests can actually deliver and deliver today.
Let me just, thank you very much. We are going to come back to COP26 and its impact in a moment, but I'd just like to dig a little bit deeper on the challenges for a company like Bayer in triangulating very different goals around food production on the one hand and sustainability on the other. So last year in the Carbon Disclosure Project's category of forests, Bayer actually scored a B rating. Matthias, are you content with that, or are you working to move up in the rankings, as it were?
Yeah, no, we want to be A-rated across the three categories. Carbon, where Bayer actually is one of those roughly 300 companies in the world that has an A rating. Water, where we moved from an A to an A minus because the bar has been risen. And of course, also the forest space. I believe that our ambition only can be to be A-rated across the board. But more important than ratings is that we create value chains where farmers thrive whilst they protect their forests. That is basically what we really have to do. As much as I'm passionate about rating and competitive, I much more like to make sure that our value chains are designed in ways that allows farmers to basically protect forests. And there's a basic, simple thing that needs to change. That wood today is often more valuable than a living forest. And we have to move away from that thinking about these ecosystems.
Yeah. Eron, how do you see the responsibility of a company like Bayer? What would you say to Matthias about that B rating?
Well, listen, I would just say Bayer has been as you mentioned, a founding corporate member of the LEAF Coalition, and Matthias and the team has been incredibly, supportive in lots of ways beyond, the simple commitment to LEAF. But look, one of the reasons, the primary reason we founded LEAF is to increase ambition on all sides. This is not a static. And I think, as Matthias said, we went from A to A minus because the bar changed. And I think that's what should happen. We need to increase ambition across the board relentlessly, right? We are quite literally running out of time. And so this is, the bar needs to keep coming down, keep getting harder. We need to keep raising ambition on corporates like Bayer, but also on the other side, right, would be on the supply side of LEAF, which is the countries that are reducing that have deforestation. We need to demand that they reduce deforestation, and so on all of us. We need to really increase ambition as far and as fast as we possibly can.
So let's come back to the COP26, the UN climate conference that met last fall in Glasgow. And Matthias, you went there, you were there. And at COP26, more than 100 world leaders promised to end and reverse deforestation by 2030. Bayer announced its own commitment to that same goal in 2019, which at the time was actually perceived as revolutionary. What changed in just 3 short years that so many more actors are now getting on board with that?
I think people do the math, and the math and climate science is very simple. If we do not protect the existing forests, the climate targets that we need to achieve to avoid a temperature increase above 1.5 degrees by the end of this century are absolutely not attainable. So forest protection is a necessary precondition for all the climate action that leads to these massive transformations that we, for example, see in the car sector today, where we electrify and phase out the internal combustion engine. So without forest protection, no success in the climate action is the insight that anybody who does the math will ultimately arrive.
Let me ask you about targets in general, Eron, because sometimes for people who are not at the very heart of the climate debate, it can be almost confusing, all the different targets that are out there, all the different manifestos about reaching this by that time, and so on. Do we need this proliferation of targets? What do they do that wouldn't have if simply said, hey, this is the challenge, we're going to get on with it?
So to maybe demystify some of that, really, there's one overarching target, which is we need to stay within safe temperature rise, which is below 1.5 degrees. So all the other targets are really trying to move us, bend the arc and move us in that direction. And why so many different targets is because different industries, different actors play a different role and have different opportunities to influence that arc, right? There are some sectors of the economy that are hard to abate. There's not a technology. I like to use airlines because I just flew from Europe, and there isn't a battery electricity powered plane that we can fly on transcontinentally. The technology is being worked on, and so, but we need to push that. We need to push the ambition on that. So we need targets that are scientifically credible and are workable from a practical perspective. And so that's why you see. And then another example is investors, right? Investors, typically banks and private equity and funds. They have different opportunities. They don't typically have high emissions, but they have the ability to influence companies in their portfolios. So what's a target for them? What are we asking them to do to stay in line with this, Paris, with this temperature goal, right? Which is this sort of Paris-aligned temperature target.
Thank you very much. Let me get Matthias to weigh in on the same point, if I may, because for you as architect of Bayer's sustainability initiative, you've been a big advocate of science-based targets. Can you say a word about where you see the merits of that approach?
What I like about the Science-Based Target Initiative, which now has amassed more than 1,000 companies to follow the same approach in reducing their carbon emissions, is, first of all, it's science-based. So it talks about the amount of emissions that need to be reduced for humanity to stay in a safe space, to avoid an increase of emissions beyond those 1.5 degrees. And let's just be clear, a temperature increase of 1.5 degrees means that on the existing agricultural land, we have 5 to 10% less output. So even that creates lots of problems. There will be much more heat that affects many, many people's health. So even 1.5 degrees is not good news, but it's kind of where the world says, okay, we have to kind of get there. And the Science-Based Target Initiative is a framework that kind of measures commitments against this goal. The second thing it does is it creates a common language. So every company that has reduction targets needs to have them for their own operations as well as for all their suppliers. And that way you create like a global chain of responsible companies that reduce carbon emissions. Without such a framework, it will be very hard to remove the 55 gigatons or billion tons of carbon emissions that are heating the planet every year as we speak at the moment. So that's what I really like about it. And ultimately, numbers don't lie. So we will, for the first time, report on our emission reduction targets on March 1st. So I can't give you the results today, but the accountability that comes with such a framework will move away from like the good old commitments that were like detergents for greenwashing. We will all be held accountable whether we are on that path or not. And that is important in the overall debate on the business side. Business needs to be held accountable for whether or not they achieve their targets.
And of course, it relates back to what Eron was talking about, the role of financing and ESG factors. Let's come back to that in a moment. But some of the activists whom I encounter in my work would say, look, the two big targets we need are that 1.5 degree warming target that both of you mentioned, but also a target of zero growth. There is a school of thought that says the only way we are really going to succeed in environmental protection and climate protection is to stop pursuing economic growth. What would your answer be to them? First, Eron, and then Matthias.
I don't think that's feasible, and I don't think it's necessary. In fact, I think we can, and I think we're showing in especially in places where you have regulated carbon markets, let's say, or that you can delink, or we're starting to see the delinkage of growth from emissions. We need to do better, but I think we just need to think about growth in a different way. If I can maybe also just come back just briefly to a point you were asking earlier about what's changed over the last 3 years, because we really are seeing a lot more action at evidenced by COP and evidenced by the amount of action we're seeing on the corporate side. So a few points, and I think this is also something to keep in mind as some of your listeners are thinking, hey, what can we do, right, to help on this? One is, I think the pressures and forces on companies has changed quite dramatically over the last few years. Previously, there might have been nice sort of marketing benefit from being sustainable, but now it really is fundamental to the operations of businesses, whether it's from license to operate in wherever they're working, whether it's from the financial markets, whether it's from their employees. That's important, being able to recruit, for companies, being able to recruit and retain talent, and their employees are asking this. So lots of different pressures on companies. Number two, I would say is, the visceral impact of climate change and more broadly, right, and these are impacts of climate change, but more broadly, hitting ecological limits in just about every sector, whether it's biodiversity, we talked about oceans and fisheries, plastics. I mean, we're hitting ecological limits across the board. And this is becoming people are viscerally feeling this. You're seeing this in the news in a way that we hadn't previously. The third point I'd make is the climate movement, and you just referenced it, Melinda, which made me think about it. I mean, especially this youth climate movement, I think has been very impactful. I don't agree with all their points or all their tactics, but I think it's been very, very impactful. And fourth is the pandemic. This risk, this sort of systemic, global, abstract risk that we've always knew was out there and we've been told about, now became very real. And I think that also makes people understand that this risk of climate change, it's coming. Science is telling us it's coming, and it also it's also an abstract, for many people, an abstract thing. And so I think those four things are really driving a lot of change. I'm sure there's more, but those are four that I point to.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. People in the global south, of course, have long felt the impacts, but people in temperate zones are now also feeling and seeing them more and more. And certainly that does seem to be making a difference. Let me ask whether, Matthias, you would also like to speak to that point about zero growth. What do you say to people who make that claim?
Well, zero growth is a proxy for a radical change in the way we do business. Bayer is around for 160 years next year. President Lincoln was US president in his second term when Bayer was founded. So it's quite a while. And first, our growth was based on coal. Then it moved to petrol. And our future growth needs to be fueled by biology and not chemistry anymore. That's the fundamental shift of our industry. For me, I see two steps. First, we need to decouple our growth from carbon emissions. That is what's happening at the moment. But in the long run, Bayer needs to be a company that basically derives its business growth from removing carbon out of the atmosphere rather than blowing carbon into the atmosphere. And we need to do that for our own operations, but more importantly for our agricultural value chain, because farmers are both suffering from climate change as well as are emitters of emissions. So that's basically the future of our company. Decoupling growth from emissions and reversing from emissions to actually removing carbon out of the atmosphere. That's a big transformation that I find super exciting. And I think those who are arguing for zero growth overall will have no problem with companies growing by removing carbon out of the atmosphere. They will welcome it.
And if I could do that, I mean, some companies, I mean, this is an important point, right? Companies like Bayer and companies around are figuring out how they transition, right, to this new business model. Some companies will be able to do it. Other companies won't. And potentially some big companies, not suggesting Bayer is one of them, but some big companies won't be able to transition. And that's frankly okay. So it's not going to, just like for those in the US, right, or North America, Blockbuster Video, when we moved to Netflix, et cetera, we don't, we don't have Blockbuster anymore. I think companies that don't transition quickly are going to go the way of Blockbuster.
Thank you very much. Let's come back now to the role of forests and talk a little bit about what you mentioned earlier, Eron, the priority of reversing the destruction of tropical forests in particular. What will it take to turn this around? I cited that very distressing statistic on the Amazon, for example, the fact that it is now a net emitter, so to speak. What do you want from policymakers, and what does the private sector need to do?
Well, I think if you asked most traditional economists the value of a forest, I think most of them would point to board feet, timber, real estate value, some other extractive use that degrades the forest. And I think what we need is we need to find ways to incentivize the protection and restoration of a forest. So we need to make forests worth more alive, more alive than dead is what we often say. So I think what we need from the private sector are participating in initiatives like LEAF, where they're committing to use high integrity nature-based solutions. They're for their residual emissions, but within their operations and within their value chains, they're doing all that they can to eliminate deforestation and support the restoration of forests. We need robust and workable frameworks and standards. We mentioned SBTI. There's other standards that are there and evolving around voluntary corporate action. And then from policymakers, at the end of the day, this voluntary action that corporates are taking is really important. I mean, I think it's real, and we applaud all Bayer and all the LEAF coalition participants. But at the end of the day, voluntary action is only going to get us so far. So we need policymakers to really create and move us to compliance and regulatory markets. We've got them in Europe, we've got them in California. We need to continue expansion of those and have those include basically crediting for nature-based solutions. So protecting forests, restoring forests, and the broader suite of nature-based solutions.
Essentially rewarding those who are doing that work, which actually has benefits, as you said, co-benefits for all of us. I have a couple of audience questions. Let me bring in this one for you, Eron, if I may, because it also goes to tropical forests, and it comes from Daniel Ruplal. And he says, forest reserves in the Caribbean region are being depleted substantially due to deforestation. We all know the importance of this. Are there any international incentives or projects that seek to help Caribbean countries to become more resistant to climate change in respect to conservancy of forest resources?
So this is probably a good moment for me to talk about the LEAF Coalition and what we're doing with LEAF and Emergent. And so, and so both LEAF, just to address the headline, what we're doing with LEAF and Emergent would certainly apply to Caribbean countries and countries throughout the global South. And so what we have done is create a true public-private partnership that includes civil society with LEAF, which LEAF stands for Lowering Emissions from Accelerating Forest Finance. The company participants, including Bayer, committing to purchase high quality jurisdictional REDD+ credits, emission reduction credits, from countries that reverse deforestation, that commit to increasing their ambition to protect forests, and can do that in a demonstrable way, meaning that the reductions are verified and validated to a third-party standard, which is called the Architecture for REDD Transactions, or ART, to create a tradable unit. Right. So we now have over 20 companies involved, and we have 3 donor countries, including which are the U.S., UK, and Norway. So together at COP, we talked about COP earlier, we collectively have commitments of over $1 billion to pay countries that reduce deforestation. And so this would certainly apply to, as I say, Caribbean countries. I think there are lots of things that are different about LEAF and Emergent. One of the things is we're focused on what we call jurisdictional REDD+. Basically, that means we're looking at the entire country or entire state, and that all the activities within that jurisdiction are what we would what contribute to reversing deforestation and what the jurisdiction can generate credits for. Emergent is a nonprofit, and we act as the transaction intermediary. And so what we're doing right now is we're talking to countries all over the global South. We've done this through a open call for proposals, and we're bringing them to this group of buyers, the LEAF Coalition buyers, including the companies and countries, and entering into long-term purchase agreements. The idea there is precisely what I was saying earlier. We need to help create economic incentives to keep forests standing and restore forests. And by making these payments, long-term payments, right, we'll contract over a 5-year forward period. That then can give the countries and the governments and the private sector on the ground the confidence that, look, if we protect the forest, there'll be an economic incentive. And so that would certainly apply to, as I say, the Caribbean countries.
Thank you so much. And Matthias, talk to us a little bit about Bayer's role in LEAF. As I mentioned at the outset, Bayer was one of the founding members. It's an active, ongoing participant. So tell us about that from the company's perspective, and also what you see as unique about LEAF.
I mean, the first thing that is unique, Eron spoke about that he was able to mobilize $1 billion. That is not enough to protect the world forests, but compared to all the carbon offsetting projects you have heard about, it's a lot of money. So in a period of 4 months in 2021, Eron was mobilizing the amount of money that is roughly 3 times all the carbon offsetting that that was out there. So it's a big shift, and it's a shift that is created by a large coalition that works across governments, NGOs, and business. And I happen to believe, and that's my favorite SDG number 17, only if those 3 work together and put enough money in the mix, we will anyhow make progress. So for me, LEAF is one of those lighthouse projects and good news of 2021 about goal number 17. For Bayer to participate, we had to basically, first of all, demonstrate that we are having a science-based target commitment, so that we as a company would actually reduce our emissions at a very aggressive pace, and we would need to demonstrate allegiance to the overall goal to be carbon neutral by 2050. And that is a precondition for any company that would participate. So we don't want companies that are basically just trying to find a cheap way to continue what they are doing right now, because we will not solve this problem if businesses don't do everything they can to transition out of the carbon-fueled economy. That's kind of a necessary precondition. And then the second point, of course, and that were quite difficult conversations, Eron, dare I say, it was about the credibility of what we are doing in our value chain. So is Bayer really committed to stop deforestation, or are we basically just looking for like a nice way to participate in a greenwashing exercise? Was the deeper question we had to answer, and any other participating company has to answer. I would say that it's great that we have 20 or so companies. We need many, many more for LEAF to be successful in the long run, and most importantly, for LEAF to meet the demand of jurisdictions. So countries in the global south who say, look guys, we're talking about a just transition. We are not responsible for the carbon emissions that create all the problems. We want to protect our forest, help us, are lining up, and we don't have enough business and public support to meet their demands. So in the just transition and in the run-up for the next COP this year and the then following one, we need to mobilize more companies that meet the criteria to commit. And they commit to the most credible way of forest protection and natural conservation a business can commit to, which is, I think, the real success of Eron and the team to really harness this very high standard and to make that the bar everybody has to jump over.
I have an audience question here that in some way lays out the position that some would take in questioning the entire value chain and the challenges that arise in being truly sustainable. It's from Ricardo Guzman Duque, and he says, how to contribute to the environment if every day in agriculture there's more resistance to weeds and pests for which we increase the doses of agrochemicals. What do you say to him in regard to the trade-offs, as it were, between protecting soils, protecting forests on the one hand, and at the same time trying to ensure that agricultural intensity that you say is key to enabling farmers to feed a growing population?
In the last, I want to say 50 years, the world population doubled, and agriculture contributed to it. Yeah, so basically the land being used has not doubled, but they contributed with technologies that were by and large chemistry based. I think the next wave of intensification will be biology based. We will have alternatives to fertilizers. We will have seeds that are much more resistant, for example, against increasing insect pressure. And we will also have new ways of dealing with, for example, the competition between a plant and another wild plant or a weed. Yeah? So all of that will change. And as I said earlier, this transition to decarbonization will also mean that the kind of products and the way those products are sold will fundamentally change. That is what Bayer is working on. Overall, the carbon intensity of our food, fiber, and fuel production needs to go down. That's absolutely crucial. And most importantly, we need to support farmers to deal with climate change. Why do we have a 10% or even 15, 20% food loss if we don't control the global climate? It is because insect pressure is increasing, storms, droughts, floods are destroying harvests, and we need to support farmers, small and large, to deal with that. I find one of the most telling things about climate change is that climate change doesn't care whether you are a large, successful, highly technicized farmer or a small-scale farmer that literally fights for survival. They are all affected massively, and none of them has the power to withstand the climate discomfort zone, so to speak. So we have to radically change, and that is the transition journey we have. And not everything we are selling today will be in the market in 5 to 10 years. I think there will be huge transformation in how we produce and what we produce.
Matthias, you may feel that you've just answered the next question, but let me bring in another audience question that also came in from Daniel Ruplal, who had asked about Caribbean forests earlier. He writes, are there any partnerships between Bayer and other agricultural organizations, for example, Nutrien, to promote the use of healthy forest and how that can be integrated with agriculture?
We can see, for example, in Brazil, that there is a coalition in Brazil of businesses, including some of the agribusinesses. I wish more would be part of it, to really drive the forest protection agenda in a country, even at a time where the political will is not always fully aligned with forest protection. So more companies could be part of it, but there are more and more realizing that without forests, it's going to be much harder to farm in the long run as well. I said earlier, rainfall patterns are highly influenced by our ability to protect forests. So I can see more and more happening there. And Nutrien is one of those key players, for example, that would help with the transition from chemically based fertilizers to biologically based fertilizers, which I believe is one of those big decarbonization transformations of the next 10 years.
Thank you very much. Let me come to the very basic topic, Eron, of money. And both of you have mentioned that $1 billion figure. In fact, we do have an audience member who has said $1 billion US. And yes, Eduardo Rafael Morales Mercado, it is $1 billion US. So Eron, let's talk about money beyond that $1 billion. Elsewhere, you have said that, quote, forests need a new business plan or even a new investment banker. What did you mean by that?
Well, it's going back to what I was saying earlier, which is in like it or not, we're working with the economic system that we have. And the economic system recognizes typically extractive value from forests, use as a timber or real estate or development, some sort of development. So we need to rethink that and create revenue streams that support standing forests, right? And we need to do that within our current economic system, right? Because nobody's come up with a better model yet, at least that's been deployed. So forest provides so many other values and benefits to society than just timber and real estate and et cetera, extractive uses. And so one of the things that I think a key part of what we're trying to do with LEAF and Emergent is recognize at least the climate value, right? And so through emission reduction credits. And so we need to look for other ways to for standing forests and standing ecosystems to get paid for the services they provide: clean water, climate regulation, clean air, biodiversity, spiritual value, et cetera, right? So all these values that frankly are going to be worth a lot more to society than just the one-time chopping them down agricultural value or whatnot, or timber value. So that's the business model. We need to, the forests need that business model, and they need somebody who can speak frankly. And this is what we're really trying to do with Emergent, right? We're trying to create an organization, Emergent is a nonprofit, but an organization that can speak both languages, right? That we can speak the language of the forest and the environmental community, but we can also speak the language of business and finance, right? And create that at the end of the day, we're trying to create the incentive, the revenue stream to keep forests standing. It's not enough, right? It's not always just purely dollars and cents. There's lots of other things at play, but dollars and cents are going to be an important incentive and a key part of the puzzle. Also, $1 billion is a lot, but that's not enough either. I mean, we need to 50x that commitment. So I just joined Matthias in the call for, right. If there are other folks at companies listening, we are really looking, we think every company should participate. Of course, what Matthias was also saying about the criteria, right? We're not just accepting every company. Like, companies have to prove that they are really taking action within their value chains in order to participate. And that's really part of this increasing ambition, right? A high ambition coalition is what we're after.
Two quick follow-ups, if I may. First of all, in terms of support for foresters and farmers who are in fact helping to preserve forest land and soils, are there best practice examples you can name where countries that are really right out in front of the wave, as it were? That's question number one. Question number two is, it all sounds very logical, but you are facing powerful business interests, of course, that do represent the monetary side of deforestation. How do you summon the political will to go head to head with them?
Yeah, thanks for that question. The interesting thing is a lot of deforestation is is happening because of marginal economic output, right? These are very, oftentimes poor communities, illegal deforestation. I think most of big business like Bayer and most of the big multinational corporations are taking steps to remove deforestation from their supply chain. We need to do more, and so I think, but political will is really important. And so part of what we're trying to engage, not, either directly or through relationships with the other LEAF that the LEAF participants have, whether it be the companies or donors, engage in the political dialogue, but the economic and political dialogue. And this is really, there's we need to engage on both those levels to get these countries to really take the actions to reverse deforestation. In terms of what those actions are and what our best practice is, they really need to be contextualized within the local country. A lot of people point to Costa Rica, which has been a leader in so many things in environment and sustainability. Costa Rica's had a long program, what's called a PES, Payment for Ecosystem Services program, where the government maintains a national fund that they will pay farmers literally a check every year to keep forests standing on their land. That's a really interesting model. That doesn't fit every country. Other countries, they just need to create new protected areas, enforce existing protected areas, pay for park guards, create tax incentives. There's lots of things. I mean, that's the beauty here is there's a lot of things that they can do. And there's frankly a lot of international support to get them to do it. It is a question of political will and, as you suggest, and finance.
Thank you. Matthias, I saw you nodding your head emphatically. So let me get you to perhaps also to respond to that. And then I have an audience question on a similar point.
And I perhaps saw the audience question already, like as a little text, because somebody talked about, asked a question about charcoal being one of those energy sources for many people. That's what Eron is talking about.
Exactly.
an average American fridge consumes more electrical energy than the average person in sub-Saharan Africa. An average American fridge. I have 2 of them in my home. Yeah. We need to work on electrifying rural areas in sub-Saharan Africa to fight sources of deforestation that are beyond comprehension. Renewable energy is going to be crucial in those regions. So as we are worrying about how to get our cars electrified, let's not forget that the most important thing is the just transition, and to change this inequity of access to, and you can add vaccines, you can add electricity, and all those other topics that drive some of those behaviors. So that for me is a very important one I want to make. It makes no sense to convert rainforests into charcoal, and yet it's a major source of energy in sub-Saharan Africa. We have to stop that, and when we come together in Egypt and Sharm el-Sheikh, I hope that we really work on this just transition and find ways to stop the craziness that even though we know that it doesn't make sense, is still a standard practice today.
Let me just say before we're slowly moving into our last 5 minutes or so of our live talk, but let me just say that we have people with us at this moment from Bangladesh, Morocco, Germany, Lebanon, Brazil, Spain, India, Argentina, and many more countries. So a great wide listenership with us here today. Let me ask you, Eron, to talk, because you said, yeah, US $1 billion sounds like a lot, but the fact is we need a great deal more to achieve our goals. Tell us what's ahead, what's next, what will your initiative be focusing on in the upcoming months?
Sure. Well, we're recruiting more companies. So we've got 20, just over 20 now, and so we're recruiting more companies. And we're moving towards another thing we did at COP is we signed the first letters of intent, right, with 5 countries, forest countries, that are interested in reducing deforestation and getting paid by the coalition. We need to move towards firm contracts, right, where we say, okay, you guys are going to do this, and we're going to pay you. And we want to get more countries. We had, as I mentioned, we did a call for proposals that we released on Earth Day in 2021. We had 35 jurisdictions reply to that, submit proposals to the LEAF Coalition, which we thought was terrific. That demonstrates there is the political will, right? 35 jurisdictions around the world, about half of which were countries and half were large states, like the states in the Amazon, or they want to do this, right? So if you can pay, if we can afford it, right, we'll do it. And so we want to bring them all on board, and then we want to get more. And and so ultimately, look, I mean, aspirationally, where we'd like to be is a gigaton per year, that's 1 billion tons. So right now it's roughly $10 per ton, so that's $10 billion per year. So that's orders of magnitude from where we are. But that's where we would like to get to over the next 5 or 6 years.
Thanks very much. Matthias, as I mentioned, you were at COP26. You've mentioned COP27 coming up in Egypt. Do you expect forests to be high on the agenda there?
They need to be. Again, the COP doesn't make any sense if we lose sight of the role forests play in this climate action. We might as well not kind of hold these meetings anymore, because without solving for the problem of deforestation, there won't be a success in climate policy on global level, period. So the question is the public, is the business communities, are the key governments able to kind of maintain the momentum that Alok Sharma and the UK government has created at COP26 in Glasgow? And I'm sure, knowing Eron a bit, he will be one of those dynamos that is actually doing that is fueling that conversation. But what we also need is a conversation about why net zero means that companies need to do both. They need to reduce their emissions, but they also at the same time need to invest in carbon offsetting, in protecting nature to offset carbon. In the case of Bayer, until 2030, roughly half of our emissions will be reduced, roughly half will be offset. Until 2040, another half will be reduced, the rest will be offset, and by 2050, maybe 10% of all the residue emissions of Bayer will need to be offset in order to achieve carbon neutrality. These are two legs we need on this very long march towards carbon neutrality. And it's important that we don't play one against the other. We need both. And that, I think, will drive the additional support on the business community that Eron needs to meet the demand of the many countries and regions who would like to do nothing more than protecting their natural habitats.
Thank you very much. We have just about 1 minute left, and I'd like to put one last audience question. It's a really big question. Both of you have addressed it in different ways, but I'm going to put it to you nonetheless because it's a pretty ideal summit question. It comes from Eduardo Rafael Morales Mercado, and he asks, what is the best contribution you're making? It's not clear whether he means your organization or you yourself personally to fighting climate change in the world. Eron?
Oh yeah, terrific. The one thing I would say, just pulling off the questions also on COP26, and I'll come to this, is it's, you know, we're COP27. My first COP was COP11. There was a lot in those days around learning by doing. It's kind of practice. We're not practicing anymore, right? This is not a drill anymore. Like we've got to move as fast as we possibly can. And so one of the realizations come to the question that I've had in my 20 years in working in climate change is there is not one company that can do this by themselves. There's not one environmental NGO that can do it. There's not even a government that can do this by themselves. We need a platform for collective action, unlike we've seen in the past, that's very action focused, that operates like a commercial, entity. And one of the interesting things that I think I've realized in this evolution, right? And I mentioned, so the way Emergent works is we essentially purchase the credits from the jurisdictions, and then we sell them on to the Leaf Coalition buyers. We show up. Emergent is a party to the transaction, and this comes also to your other question about nature having a new investment banker. We're in the transaction, not working for a company, not working for the jurisdictional government. We show up and are part of the negotiation on behalf of the environment, right? And everything we're negotiating in that contract is thinking about how do we maximize environmental impact. So that, I think, is a really powerful, both the platform for collective action and being in a transaction for the environment, I think is really quite important.
Thank you so much. Matthias?
Well, on the personal side, I think the largest contribution, if I do the math correctly, is eating less mammals and less mammal-derived products. Yeah, that's a huge one. And on the business side, I spoke about this transformation of Bayer away from a coal and later petrol or natural gas-based company to a company that harnesses the power of biology. And to see that on a company that is, 45 billion annual revenues, to kind of drive that journey is, in my book, probably the biggest contribution that I make. But I'm always humbled by what governments can do or coalition builders like Eron, because they have more power in the transition than any one company, even from a standpoint of a company like Bayer. So we should never forget that these coalition builders are the crucial players in the decarbonization game.
A very good note to end on. Thank you so much to both of you for taking the time to talk about this important topic with us, and we wish you utmost success with your efforts going forward. Many thanks also to all of our audience for giving us your attention and also for your very valuable contributions to the discussion. We hope to see you again soon, and until then, I wish everybody a good day or evening, depending what time zone you're in. Stay healthy and safe. Goodbye.
Thank you, Melinda. Thank you, Eron.
Thank you.